while you're on that shot, I can ad-lib, eh?
this examination and produce the kind of results that we have. Now, over the years, we found that the technical briefing has assisted, and it has helped to possibly allay certain concerns, certain criticisms that may exist. But more importantly, I think it's about helping all of us to understand better as a sector in terms of where we are, where we come from, and where we are getting to. Now, if one looks at the educational endeavor, it is enormous. It involves a multiplicity of factors, and no single report can accurately capture what transpires in an education system which is as complex and diverse as the South African education system. Now, the first slide possibly already provides a hint of the direction in which the system is heading. We are certainly a system on the rise, and I believe that what we've seen over the last 21 years confirms that we are moving in the right direction. There may be drops, but I believe that overall there's an upward movement in the system, and I think as a department we are moving away from just looking at annual pass rates. We are beginning to look at the system in its entirety to understand the basket of factors that will contribute to understanding the performance of the system as diverse as ours. And we think that this plant accurately represents this particular education system, which is a system in development, a system in transformation, a system in transition, a system that is growing. Now, with all growers, there's stops and starts. There will be faults and failures, but it's important that from our faults and failures, we must be able to provide the necessary ingredients that will allow this young little plant to grow and mature and produce the kind of fruit that is required. Now, in understanding performance, I think you will all agree with me that there are key principles determining education performance. And these 5 key principles are part of the mantra of the Department of Basic Education. We are promoting access at all levels, redress, and redress is an important initiative. Equity, given our historical past, we cannot ignore the issue of equity. Efficiency, and finally, quality. But you would agree with me, as persons that have been involved in education, that we have done reasonably well in terms of access, redress, and equity. But the 2 areas that are still a major challenge would be the area of efficiency and quality. And I believe that the National Senior Certificate, together with the other national assessment programs and the international assessment programs, provide us with very good indicators of the kind of progress that we are making in the area of efficiency and quality. Now, in the next slide, I talk about the skills that need to be reflected by the 21st century learner. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that education is about the holistic development of the individual. And we want to produce out of our schooling system critical thinkers, learners that are capable of problem solving, learners that are capable of creativity and innovation, learners that are able to work together in a team towards a common goal, and more importantly, our learners must have a sense of social justice and human rights. And given our historical past, we cannot ignore the last 2 important elements in the holistic development of our learners. Now, in framing the program of development, the program of transformation in South Africa, we are to a large degree governed and directed by the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the one that relates directly to education refers to inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And again, the issue of quality emerges very strongly in the Sustainable Development Goal 4. And I think what is of paramount importance is to ensure that we are producing lifelong learners. I think we are saying that we don't want learners that merely regurgitate the facts. We don't want rote learners. We want learners that are able to master the art of learning, and from that are able to become lifelong learners even beyond schooling and beyond higher education. Now, all of this is well captured in the National Development Plan. And in terms of the National Development Plan, which again strongly captures the improvement of quality basic education, and basically we are saying that we have a vision towards 2030. And we need to make sure that by 2030, we are able to take the system to where we think it needs to be. And as a sector, there are various initiatives which are aligned to the National Development Plan. And those are articulated in those bullets under element B. And as a system, we have a large number of learners that are part of the school nutrition program that receive fresh, hot meals on a daily basis. And I think no learner can be productive and engage in learning if he is subjected to the pangs of hunger. In like manner, we have an infrastructure program, the no-fee school. I think we've done exceptionally well in that particular area. The improvement of the competency and the capacity of school principals to be effective leaders, because you and I have observed that an effective and a well-run school is to a large extent dependent on the leadership skills of the school principal. But most important would be the development of our teachers and making sure that our teachers are taken from where they are to where we want them to be, because they are the backbone. They are the centerpiece of education and educational success. Now, having spoken about the National Development Plan, in terms of the Department of Basic Education, or the key elements of the National Development Plan are captured in the Action Plan to 2019 towards the realization of Schooling 2030. And there are three key elements of the Action Plan which are measured by the results of the National Senior Certificate. And they are firstly, looking at the number of learners that are awarded with admission to bachelor studies, and the second would be the number of grade 12 learners who pass mathematics, and you and I are in agreement that mathematics has to be a national imperative. And lastly, looking at the number of learners that pass with physical science as part of the qualification. Now, having sketched the background, I think what is now important for us to look at the NSC examination and the role that the NSC examination plays in understanding to what extent how we're moving in the direction of the imperatives of the National Development Plan, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think what is important is to understand that as much as we talk about the number of learners that are passed, but the pass or the qualification is an indication of the skills, the knowledge, and the values that have been attained by these learners, which makes them lifelong learners. But what I think is important, and what we've observed, that in our international assessment program, and I'm referring particularly to TIMS 2015, it has confirmed that we are moving in the right direction. For those of you that have not had access to the TIMS report, if you compare performance in TIMS 2003 to TIMS 2015, South Africa, given the 36 countries that have participated over these years, has made the largest improvement. Our improvement in mathematics was 87 points, and in the case of science, it was 90 points. So this, I think, ladies and gentlemen, is an indication that we are moving in the right direction, and certainly I think we need a round of applause. I'm not sure the reluctance, but you see, it's typical of us South Africans that we do not seem to welcome good news, or whenever there's good news, we are critical of that good news. But this is indeed significant, that we make the largest improvement. Now, understandably, that as a country we are operating from a lower base, but the fact that we've made this significant improvement over these years indicates that our intervention program and the goals that we've articulated are taking us to where we need to be. Now, let us look at the class of 2016. Having sketched the background in terms of the broader goals and the broader objectives, how does the class of 2016 give us some sense of where we are moving? And does it verify and authenticate what we are observing in TIMS? But firstly, we need to understand a little better the class of 2016. Firstly, the class of 2016 is the 9th cohort of learners to sit for the National Senior Certificate, and it's the 3rd cohort that is now being exposed to the CAPS curriculum. Now remember that we implemented a new curriculum in 2008, but in 2014, the CAPS, which was a more streamlined version of the National Curriculum Statement. So in a sense, this particular cohort have had the experience of 3 years of the CAPS. And that has brought a large degree of stability to the system. And our teachers are now more confident of the CAPS, and therefore one would expect that there should be improvement in the system. The 2016 cohort has certainly benefited from these kind of factors that would have accrued to them. Now, these learners entered the schooling system in 2005, just after an important curriculum revision was implemented. So the point that we're trying to get across is that the class of 2016, having started their schooling program in 2005, would have benefited from the revisions and improvements of the curriculum. So therefore, they emerge out of the schooling system with a skills and knowledge set that is directly related or prepares them for the 21st century. Now, one of the important programs of the Department of Basic Education has been the focus on early childhood development. Now, if you look at the Internal Efficiency of School Systems report, which was published in 2013, it indicates that 40% of 5-year-olds were enrolled at an educational institution in 2002 already. So the point again we are emphasizing is that a large percentage of this particular cohort would have been exposed to early childhood development. And you and I know that if the foundations are firm and solid, learners are definitely going to perform better in the later grades. Now, what is the size and scope of the 2016 NSC examination? Now, we have possibly the largest number in our 20-year history in terms of the democratic dispensation. Both part-time and full-time candidates totaled to a number of 828,020 learners. That gives you 674,652 full-time candidates which means these are learners that were at school and attended tuition on a full-time basis. And then we have a large cohort of 153,368 learners who were part-time. Part-time learners do not receive tuition, do not attend school. These are in the main repeater candidates who would have written the NSC exam and would not have passed the NSC exam and therefore come back to write either one or two subjects. In order to ensure that this examination is administered in its entirety, 258 question papers were set, and this is inclusive of both the supplementary exam, which will be written in February, March. A total of 11.1 million question papers were printed, 10.7 million scripts were marked by a total of 47,414 markers, and the examination was administered at 6,832 examination centers, and the examination was managed by an estimated 69,000 invigilators. The marking took place at 140 marking centers. So a large examination by all measurements. Now, what is the size of the full-time enrollment? Now, we focus on the full-time enrollment simply because these are learners that have been at school, and they are the ones that benefit from the core of the resources. And therefore, one needs to judge the productivity and the output of the system based on full-time learners. But it's not that part-time learners are ignored. We do include them in our report. Now, I should say at the outset that you will receive a comprehensive technical report which provides you with all the detail that you require. And you could use that as part of your bedtime reading to get into a deeper understanding of the statistics and the figures relating to this exam. But the important point with the slide that is projected, and I'm hoping that my co-presenters on both the right and the left will point to the figures. My one on the right seems to be functional, but not the one on the left, Mr. Fenter, yeah. I think the important figure there is the figure of 674,652 full-time candidates that enrolled for the exam. This is an increase from the 667,000 that enrolled for the exam in 2015. Now, what we are seeing here is a slight increase of about 7,000 between 2015 and 2016. Obviously, if one looks at it from 2012, from 527,000 to 674,000, and if my maths is correct, that looks like an increase of about 150,000. An increase of 150,000 learners over a period of 5 years is indeed significant, which simply means that the system needs to have the resources, physical as well as human, to be able to cater for such a significant increase in size. But it also points to the fact that that which we are always criticized about, our throughput, is improving. We are now having more learners that are enrolling, and obviously we'll get a sense of what is happening in terms of how these 674,000 learners perform in the examination. The next slide is equally important, and I'm glad that all of you are looking at both the screens, which simply means that you are paying attention. And being a school teacher, I will also get a sense when you're bored or you're dozing off. And being a school teacher, I may be tempted to also even pose a question to one or two of you. So all I'm trying to say is pay attention lest you be embarrassed. And although this session is not live, but it is recorded, so we can transmit that and allow it to go viral if we think it's necessary. Now, moving on to the next slide. This slide indicates to us the number of candidates that entered against the number of candidates that wrote. Now, I think we need to understand this a little better, and possibly what is necessary is the fact that, and maybe this needs to be pointed out, that in 2015 and 2016, we introduced a policy on progression. Now, I think this was one of the boldest steps that was taken by our minister, which basically says that if a learner fails a grade twice, there is no value in retaining that learner in that particular grade. That learner should be progressed to the next grade, but the important proviso is that learner must be supported in terms of the knowledge deficits that he may have accumulated over the years. Now, let me just say also, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, that progression is an international phenomenon. It happens in a number of countries, but possibly where we are lagging behind is that we have not put in place the support mechanisms that would be necessary for a learner to be supported when he's moved to the next grade. But this is an important point, and I'm hoping that the journalists are listening, that when a learner is progressed from one grade to the other, he has to finally, and I'm going to go very slowly here, he has to finally satisfy the grade 12 requirements in order to be awarded with the matric certificate or the national senior certificate. So it's not a policy of pass one, pass all. What we are merely saying is that a learner retained in a grade for more than 2 years and being exposed to the same kind of tuition is merely going to frustrate that learner, and that learner is going to drop out of the system. So rather than seeing a learner being frustrated and dropping out of the system, the minister has then decided that learners can be moved to the next grade, and finally at the end of grade 12, the learner must satisfy all the requirements of the NSC, takes every examination, and only if he has satisfied the requirement will he be awarded with the certificate. Now, with that background, I think we possibly better understand this slide. Now, we are saying, if you look at the national figure at the bottom, 674,652 candidates entered for the 2016 NSC exam, but 610,178 of these candidates wrote the exam, which means there's a difference of 64,474 learners. Now, how do we explain the 64,000 learners? Now, together with the concept and the dispensation of progression, the minister also promulgated a legislation which allows for learners to go through what we call the multiple examination opportunity. The multiple examination opportunity says simply this: a learner who has been progressed certainly may not be ready to write all 6 subjects in one sitting. What is the value of exposing a learner to a 6-subject sitting when he possibly will write the 6 and fail 4 or fail 5 or fail 6? Rather, what the multiple examination opportunity says, that after the learner has completed the preparatory exam, which is the examination written in September, based on the performance of the learner in that September examination, the school, together with the parent and the learner, will then make a decision whether this learner who's progressed, it only applies to progressed learners, should write all 6 subjects, or 5 subjects, or 4 subjects, or if the learner is prepared for all 6 subjects, he can then write all 6 subjects. So that difference of 64,000 would include learners that were absent, which simply means due to ill health or a number of factors which would have prevented them from writing the exam, and the rest of the learners would be learners who decided to go with the multiple examination opportunity. So our estimate is that of that 64,000, at the moment we are putting the figures together, our estimate that of that 64,000, 20,000 could possibly be candidates who were absent for one reason or the other. The other 40,000 would be learners who decided to go the route of the multiple examination opportunity. Now, what happens to these learners who've gone with the multiple examination opportunity? We have an equivalent examination in June. So these learners that have written 4 subjects, for example, in the December or in the November examination, will write the remaining examination or remaining subjects in June. So basically what we are saying is that given the fact that we have 2 equivalent examinations, and given the fact that there's a 6-month period between the 2 exams, learners will be exposed to our second chance program and other support program, which then puts them in a better position to write the examination in June. So that explains the difference, and you can see the difference in each of the provinces in terms of the number that wrote 7 or more and those that were absent or would remain incomplete until they complete the remaining subjects. So I'm hoping that all of you understand that slide, and I'm glad that all of you are still paying attention. Just for a few that are on my right, which I will focus on when I get to the next slide. Now, in this particular slide, the next slide, we're looking at candidates who wrote 7 or more for the 2015 and 2016. What this slide does, it now compares, given the fact that we know who's now written the 2016 exam, how does this compare with the numbers that wrote? And I think you need to always keep at the back of your mind, we talk about enrolled versus wrote. Now, if you compare the number that wrote in 2015 to the number that wrote the examination physically in 2016, we have a difference of about 34,000, which is not significant given the fact that we've introduced this new policy and given the fact that there's the multiple examination opportunity. So we can explain why the difference of 30,000. And one can see the differences across the different provinces in terms of the numbers that wrote. And if you look at the next slide, what the next slide does, it compares graphically, because some of us work better in terms of pictures than figures, and you can see the difference. And obviously, in terms of the numbers that wrote, KwaZulu stands out with the largest number of 147,000, and that is a slight drop from the 162,000 that wrote in 2015. Gauteng also has a large number of 103,000 compared to the 108,000. So there are marginal drops across all provinces in terms of the number that wrote. In the next slide, we now present to you the part-time candidates that wrote the examination. Now, the reason we've presented this particular slide is that very often as a department, we are criticized for the fact that when part-time numbers go up, we are accused of moving full-time learners to the part-time system so that we do not include them in the full-time computation. So we're getting smarter. We are now presenting the information up front, and we explain the questions that you may have in your mind. So if you look at the difference between 2015 and 2016, 131,000, and it has increased to 153,000, an increase of 20,000, which is not significantly different. I mean, we've dropped from 2014 to 2015. But if one looks at the general trend in terms of part-time candidates from 2012, the numbers have been increasing, 120 in 2012 to 153,000 in 2016. Now, let me also point out that when your pass rates drop, in other words, when your failure rate increases, your part-time complement will increase, simply because learners that have failed now register as part-time candidates to complete those outstanding subjects. So if you remember, in 2015, we had a drop, and therefore a larger cohort of failures, which would have moved to the part-time system. And I can also say that we do various kinds of verification to confirm that the 153,000 are legitimate part-time candidates and not any school registering these candidates as part-time candidates. In the next slide, we move to look at progress learners. And I think I need to spend a little more time here so that I consolidate what I've mentioned earlier about this policy of progress learners. Now, in this particular slide, what we are seeing is the number of progress learners in 2015. We had a total of 65,671 progress learners in 2015. That number has increased significantly from 65,000 to 108,000, an increase of 43,000, which simply means that the policy and progression is working. Now, if you look at the provincial differences, we have two provinces where the numbers have dropped, and they are Free State and Western Cape. Now, I think what I also need to say that the policy and progression, one of the challenges that we were experiencing is that the policy in a number of cases may not have been interpreted fully. And therefore, schools are applying the policy variably. And therefore, we're getting these kinds of differences between the different provinces. For example, if one looks at KwaZulu-Natal, the number increased from 10,000 to 26,000, an increase of 15,000. And if you look at a province like Limpopo, also an increase of 9,000. Mpumalanga, which is our middle-sized province, that has also shown a significant increase in 8,000. So what I'm saying is that over the next few years, we will see a kind of stability being reached in terms of the implementation of this policy, and one should see a drop in these numbers. And what I should also indicate that the minister has introduced what we refer to as preconditions to progression, so that it does not necessarily mean that every learner who's entitled to progression gets progressed. There are certain specific criteria which must be satisfied, and that will help in identifying learners who we think have the potential to be able to cope with the challenges of the next grade. Now, what are the historical trends in terms of performance? Now, this is an interesting slide because it basically looks at the performance of the system from 2010 to 2016. Now, if you look at it from 2010, the system has been on an upward trajectory. And just to refresh your mind is that the reason for the drop in 2014, that was the first year of the implementation of the revised curriculum, the CAPS. Now, in any system as large as ours, whenever there's a policy change, there's bound to be a drop in performance. So I believe, and I'm not sure about what the 2016 performance looks like, and therefore the big question, but I have a sense, and my gut tells me that we are possibly on an upward trend. But let's wait for the minister to announce what the 2016 picture looks like. Now, looking at our overall performance over the last few years, I think this slide is important because it points out the numbers of passes in terms of admission to bachelor studies, admission to diploma studies, admission to higher certificate. And if one looks at the different provinces, you will note that numbers have increased. Well, it does not give us a comparison, so I can't say whether it has increased or decreased, but what we can focus on are the percentages. And if you look at, for example, Eastern Cape, there are 15,645 learners who qualify for admission to bachelor studies, and that constitutes 18%. And if you move down the line, Free State, 9,596, and we have 35.82%. And the highest percentage would be Western Cape, 20,804 learners with 40.9, and in second position would be Gauteng with 36.2, and I think Free State at third with 35.82. As much as I talk about positions, I think we want to gradually move away from these log tables and look at criteria more holistically. But I am still old school, so pardon me if I erroneously referred to these positions. But I think what is important about this slide, ladies and gentlemen, is to understand that both your bachelor and your diploma will allow learners admission to higher education. And if I can say that from the final statistics, more than 50% of our learners qualify for admission to either bachelor or diploma studies. And I think this is significant, that more than half of our population have access to higher education. And possibly this is one of the factors that is not highlighted in terms of our reporting. The other confusion that sometimes lies in the minds of journalists and other colleagues is, why is it that when we talk about the NSC passes, the figures are so low? Does it mean that you only have a handful of learners that have passed the NSC? It's got to do with our nomenclature, and possibly that must change moving forward, Dr. Rakometsi. The NSC is, in a sense, the basic pass. A learner that gets 330%, 340% is regarded as having attained the NSC. In order to attain the highest certificate, you need to make the requirements of the basic NSC, which is 330s and 340s, but the one additional requirement is that you must pass the language of learning and teaching also at 30%. So in other words, the only difference between the highest certificate and the NSC is that the highest certificate learners have passed with 330s and 340s, but one of those 30s is the first additional language, or the language of learning and teaching. So that's the slide that presents to us the overall picture in terms of the types of passes, in terms of higher education admission. Now, if you look at the bachelor pass trend over the last few years, again, I think here we need to look at the significant improvement from 2009, from 19.9 to having reached the peak of 30.6 in 2013. Again, the drop in 2014, 2015 can be explained by the introduction of the revised curriculum. And our minister will then tell us what is our standing in terms of 2016. This gives us the bachelor pass trend in terms of numbers. And remember that when we talk about our action plan, we have a target that we've set year on year, and we are getting to our targets. And last year, in 2015, as a system, we produced 166,000 admission to bachelor studies. And this has been a significant increase from 2009, where we had 109,000. So an increase of almost 50,000 over that particular period. Now, looking at the bachelor passes in terms of numbers per province, and you'll find that there are two provinces that stand tall, extremely tall, and they are Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. And I think possibly we fully do not understand the role that KwaZulu-Natal plays in the broader landscape of performance in the country. KwaZulu-Natal constitutes over 20% of the schooling population. And if you look at the number of bachelor passes that KwaZulu-Natal contributes to the overall, and unfortunately my sight is not good enough and my monitor in front of me is not working anymore, but I'm sure you can read that better than I. I think the figure there is 147,648. Am I correct? Is that the figure for KwaZulu-Natal? No. Okay, but I think the point to be made there, oh no, sorry. That's not the right figure. Does somebody want to read out the figure for us? Nobody wants to venture. Okay, you got it. Okay, and I think what is important is that to the large number of bachelor passes that we have in the system, and obviously the other provinces are dwarfed by the large number provided by these provinces. Somebody trying to get the monitor here to work so that I don't have to depend on the audience to assist me, who seem to be rather reluctant to assist. Okay, now in this particular slide, we look at the percentage of bachelor passes per province. And here again, because we're looking at percentages, and I think one also needs to understand the differences between percentages and numbers. When we look at percentage, we compare the number that attained the bachelor and divide that by the number that wrote. So if you look at percentages, Western Cape is in the lead, okay, over the last few years. And obviously, Limpopo is at the tail end. So this gives you a comparison in terms of percentages with regard to performance, with regard to admission to bachelor studies. Now, looking at this particular slide, which is
passes by, you see, passes by achieved high certificate achieved, you see, quintile 5 schools.
That's not private though.
Yeah, but that's schools, former Model C schools, and look at the bachelor attainment. You see. So.
What were you asking, Maluleke?
So,
The bachelor?
so what I was saying to him is the ratio in terms of schools, in terms of public schools and private schools. In Lababa Pasayo, private school, bachelors, the ratio there is higher compared to public schools. So he thought what I meant to go to those who eventually enroll into higher education, into universities, the highest number comes from public schools. Obviously, because Guma private schools is only like what 50,000 people who get Ilentole bachelor pass, but of the 50,000, they are from a schooling population of 80,000 perhaps. So the ratio is high.
Oh, okay.
Young Tone.
No, when you're talking about the ratio, yeah.
Yeah, with the ratio. That's why I kept on saying the ratio. Like, no, not the difference. I'm speaking about the ratio.
You touch them on their studio.
And these are the people who educate at life. What's the doctor's name? No, it's not Ed, but this one. And then you see earlier on the thingy was wide. The shot was wide. Dr. Poliah. Dr. Poliah. Dr. Poliah.
Oh yes.
Okay, let's test.
Yeah.
I won't remember that, eh? Dr. Poliah. Just Dr. Poliah.
He's responsible for exams.
Poliah. Poliah. Okay, responsible for results, eh? Yeah, that's it. National Assessment and Public Examinations Chief Director.
of them came from KZN, and the other 7 came from the Eastern Cape. But this year, we're glad to report that 5 districts are in that category. 5 is still too high, and we certainly need to give additional focus and attention to these 5 districts. Finally, that which I alluded to at the beginning, that we do not ignore our part-time candidates. This gives you a sense of the numbers. Now, what you need to understand, that part-time candidates do not take a full package of subjects, and therefore it's very difficult to report on the overall performance of part-time candidates. But what you are seeing on this slide is the number that register and the number that finally write the exam. We had 153,000 candidates or part-time candidates registering for the exam, and 107,000 finally wrote the exam. This slide gives you an indication of the performance, and the performance is reasonable, given the fact that not all of these learners are being supported through tutorial support, and particularly if you look at mathematics and physical science, 37.8%, an improvement of about 2% from 2015. Physical science, 43% pass in terms of our part-time candidates. So that brings me to the end, and I think it would be appropriate for me just to summarize by saying that we have an increase in the number of candidates that wrote mathematics finally. The percentage of candidates that passed has also increased. The percentage of candidates that passed mathematics has increased. 2,853 schools attained a pass percentage of 80% and above. 1,452 of the schools from quintile 1 to 3 attained a pass percentage of 80% and above. 78,878 learners from quintiles 1 to 3, which I pointed out to you earlier, qualified for admission to bachelor studies, and this is more than the number of learners from quintiles 4 and 5. 32 of 82 districts achieved a pass rate of 80% and above, and the number of districts attaining a pass rate of below 50% has also decreased. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being such an attentive audience. None of you dozed, none of you fell off to sleep, and I'm sure that if I were to question you on the presentation, I would have an 80% pass. So thank you very much, and I hope that we've made some sense in terms of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Poliah. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our first session on technical report. At this point in time, I will ask our spokesperson, Mr. Elijah Mhlanga, just to give us the direction in terms of how we're going to come back for the second session, whereby the Minister will be presenting the results of 2016.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is still Elijah Mhlanga. We thank Dr. Poliah for the comprehensive presentation. It's usually a very long presentation, so we warned him that if he ran over, there was going to be no broadcast. So he duly complied. Thanks, Dr. Poliah. But mine is to announce that now that Dr. Poliah is finished, it will give us a break. We will request that everyone leaves the room for about 20 minutes or so, but we do expect everyone to be seated again at 5:45, because at 10:02 we close the doors and prepare for the live broadcast. And it is a television broadcast. It's on ANN7, it's on SABC TV, SABC 1 and 404, as well as ENCA. Because of that, they always request that we limit movement of people. On that basis, we therefore request that everyone please come back and be seated at 5:45. But for now, you are free to go out, make a call, go to the bathroom, go get some water, talk to a few people, maybe discuss some of the points that Dr. Poliah was referring to in his presentation. Until then, thank you very much.